6 Grand Slam titles. A former world number 1, the defending Wimbledon champion. And on center court, the place where she was supposed to protect her crown, Iga Swiatek stood on the wrong side of one of the most uncomfortable losses of her career. Not against another established superstar. Not against a former Wimbledon champion. Not against someone who had spent years waiting in the top 5. She lost to Alex Eala, a 21-year-old from the Philippines who, just 1 year ago, was still outside the top 100 and still trying to prove she belonged at this level. The score was 7-6, 6-2. But the score is only the clean version of the story. The real version is much messier. Because this was not just about one champion losing a tennis match. It was about a champion who has been searching for her old certainty all season, running into a young player who had absolutely no interest in being intimidated by her name. And that is why this match matters. Not because it means Iga Swiatek is finished. She is not. Not because one loss destroys a career, it does not. But because sometimes one match exposes something that has been building quietly for months. And this felt like that kind of match. The kind where the result is not the beginning of the problem. It is the moment everybody finally sees it. So the real question is not simply, how did Alex Eala beat Iga Swiatek? The real question is darker than that. What is happening to Iga Swiatek when the moments that used to belong to her are suddenly slipping away? To understand why this loss hits so hard, you have to start with who Swiatek has been. For years, she was one of the safest bets in women's tennis. When the draw came out, people did not ask whether she could go deep. They asked who might be strong enough to stop her. On clay, she was almost a force of nature. At her best, she did not just beat opponents, she compressed them. She took away their time, their rhythm, their belief. Her forehand had weight. Her return game had pressure. Her movement made the court look smaller for everyone else. That is what made her so difficult to play. You were not just facing shots. You were facing a machine that made you feel late, rushed, and slowly trapped. And that is why her current season feels so strange. Because this is not a player who built her career on random flashes. Swiatek built hers on control, on consistency, on making deep runs look normal. But this season has not looked normal. For Swiatek, no tour-level final at this stage of the year is not just a statistic. It is an alarm bell. This is a player whose standard is not good week. Her standard is titles, finals, deep runs, trophies, the kind of week where everyone else is measuring themselves against her. So when the finals stop coming, people notice. And then came Roland Garros. Paris is supposed to be her safe place. Not because anyone is safe at a Grand Slam, but because if there is one tournament where Swiatek has built something close to a kingdom, it is Roland Garros. Clay suits her timing. Clay gives her forehand more bite. Clay gives her defense more time to become offense. For years, that tournament felt like the place where she could reset everything. But in 2026, she went out in the 4th round to Marta Kostyuk. For most players, a 4th-round finish at Roland Garros would not be a disaster. For Swiatek in Paris, it felt different. It felt like a warning. Then Wimbledon arrived. And the draw gave her Alex Eala. On paper, it would have been easy for casual fans to see this as a match Swiatek should manage. Yes, Eala was rising. Yes, she was seeded. Yes, she had already made history for the Philippines. But Swiatek was still Swiatek. 6 Grand Slam titles. The defending Wimbledon champion. A player who had spent years standing in the exact kind of matches young players dream about and turning those dreams into lessons. Except Alex Eala was not walking into center court with nothing. That is the part people keep missing. She had already beaten Swiatek once before. 16 months earlier in Miami, Eala had stunned her. At the time, that win looked like a breakthrough, the kind of result that makes people say a young player has arrived. But after Wimbledon, Miami does not look like a random shock anymore. It looks like evidence. Because now Eala has beaten Swiatek twice. 2 wins against a 6-time major champion. 2 wins against one of the most difficult players of her generation. That does not erase Swiatek's greatness. It does not suddenly make Eala the better player in every condition. Tennis does not work that simply. But it does mean one thing. This matchup is real. Eala has something that bothers her. Maybe it is the lefty angles. Maybe it is the change of rhythm. Maybe it is the way Eala competes without looking overwhelmed by Swiatek's reputation. Maybe it is all of it at once. But whatever it is, it showed up again on center court. And this time, it showed up in front of the whole tennis world. The opening set told the story. Swiatek did not start like a helpless player. She broke first. She had control early. For a few minutes, the match looked like it might follow the familiar pattern. The champion absorbs the underdog's energy, then slowly bends the match back toward herself. But Eala did not disappear. She broke back. Then she pushed ahead. She did not play like someone hoping Swiatek would miss. She played like someone who believed she could create the problem herself. Different height, different angles, different timing, and most importantly, no fear of the name across the net. At 5-3, Eala had a chance to serve out the first set. That is where Swiatek reminded everyone who she was. 3 straight forehand winners. A sudden surge. The champion clawed her way back to 5-5. And for a moment, the entire match felt like it was turning. This is usually the part where young players start thinking, I had my chance. I let her back in. Now she is coming. And against Swiatek, that thought can be fatal. Because once she feels a door open, she usually steps through it. But Eala kept the door half closed. The set reached a tiebreak. And that tiebreak became the first real test of where Swiatek is right now. Eala led 5-2. Swiatek came back. Not quietly. Not softly. She won 4 straight points and reached set point. This was the moment. The old Swiatek moment. The point where the champion takes the set she was close to losing, looks across the net, and makes the younger player understand exactly how expensive missed chances can be. But Eala saved it. Then, Swiatek reached another set point. Eala saved that too. 2 chances for Swiatek to take the opening set and put the match back in familiar territory. 2 chances gone. And when Eala got her own chances, she kept pressing until the set finally broke open. On her 4th set point, Swiatek mishit a forehand long, 7-6, 11-9 in the tiebreak. 84 minutes of pressure, and the first set belonged to Alex Eala. That was the first sign that this match was not just an upset, it was a stress test. And Swiatek had just failed the part of the match she used to own. Because champions are not only judged by how they play when everything is flowing, they are judged by what happens when a set gets ugly. When the scoreboard tightens. When the opponent refuses to leave. When the crowd starts to sense something strange. For years, those moments made Swiatek more dangerous. On this day, they made her look uncertain. Then came the second set. And this is where the match turned from surprising to alarming. Because after a set like that, you would expect the younger player to dip. Eala had just spent everything emotionally. She had just survived 2 set points against the defending champion. She had just taken an 84-minute opening set on the biggest court in tennis. Most players would need time to breathe. Eala did not. She accelerated. She broke early. Then she kept pushing. Swiatek, meanwhile, looked like someone trying to force her way back into a rhythm that was no longer there. Her feet were not quite set. Her timing was not quite clean. The errors started to come in clusters. And with every mistake, the match felt less like one bad patch and more like something deeper opening up. This is where the numbers matter. Swiatek had chances in this match. That is what makes the loss more concerning. She was not blown off the court from the first ball. She was not simply overwhelmed by a player redlining for 2 perfect sets. She created 11 breakpoint opportunities. Eala saved 8 of them. That is the honest story. Not that Swiatek had no openings. She did. The story is that when those openings appeared, she could not take enough of them to change the match. And that is exactly the kind of thing that happens when a player is fighting more than the opponent. She is fighting the scoreboard, fighting her own expectations, fighting the feeling that the level she used to reach automatically is now something she has to search for. Eala, on the other side, was not perfect. She did not need to be. That is what made her performance so impressive. She was brave at the right times. She stayed clean enough when it mattered. She converted 5 of 7 breakpoints. She won 55% of her second serve points against one of the most dangerous returners of her generation. And every time Swiatek tried to make the match about reputation, Eala made it about the next ball. That sounds simple. It is not. Not on center court. Not against a defending champion. Not when you are carrying the hope of a country that has never had a player reach the second week of a Grand Slam before. But Eala handled it. And in the final game, she had to handle it one more time. Serving for the match at 5-2, she did not get an easy ending. Swiatek forced deuce again and again. The game stretched. The tension grew. For a moment, it felt like one final chance for the champion to drag the match back from the edge. But Eala stayed there. On her 3rd match point, she hit the forehand winner. Match. 7-6, 6-2. And then she dropped to the grass. That image will become the emotional memory of the match. Eala on the grass. Center court rising. The defending champion beaten. The Philippines watching history happen in real time. But if you are looking at this from Swiatek's side, the more important image came afterward. The press conference. Because what Swiatek said after the loss did not sound like a player brushing off one bad day. She talked like someone trying to be honest about a deeper fight. She said she did not care anymore about the results the way she had before. She said she had been so focused on them that it was hard to keep going like that. She said she was trying to let it go. And most telling of all, she said she was not on that level yet, that she needed to work from the beginning and get her tennis better. That is not an excuse. That is not blaming grass. That is not saying the schedule was unfair. That is a champion admitting, publicly, that the gap between who she has been and who she feels like right now has become too big to ignore. And that is the real story. Not the dramatic version, where Swiatek is finished. That would be lazy. Champions of her level do not disappear because of one match. But they do go through crises. They do lose confidence. They do reach moments where the thing that used to feel natural suddenly starts feeling heavy. And for Swiatek, the weight right now seems to be expectation. When you win early and often, people stop treating winning like an achievement. They treat it like a requirement. Every tournament becomes a test. Every loss becomes a story. Every missed forehand becomes evidence. And over time, that can turn even greatness into pressure. That is what this season feels like for Swiatek. Not a collapse of talent, a collapse of certainty. There is a huge difference. Her ground strokes have not vanished. Her movement has not disappeared. Her competitive fire is still there. But the automatic belief, the one that used to make her so brutal in close moments, does not look as automatic right now. And Alex Eala exposed that better than anyone else could have. Because Eala was not just an opponent having a good day. She was the exact kind of opponent Swiatek did not need in a fragile moment. Young, fearless, left-handed, awkward, already carrying one win over her. Already believing the name across the net could be beaten. That last part matters most. Some players walk onto court against a champion hoping the champion has an off day. Eala walked on knowing she had already solved this once. That changes the energy of a match. It changes how boldly you swing. It changes how calmly you respond when the champion pushes back. It changes what you believe is possible when the tiebreak reaches the edge. For Eala, Swiatek was not an untouchable myth. She was a player, a great player, a legendary player, but still a player. And once the underdog sees the champion that way, the whole match changes. That is why the head-to-head matters. 2 wins to 1. Miami and Wimbledon. That does not mean Eala owns Swiatek. But it does mean Swiatek now has to think about Eala differently. She has to prepare differently. She has to feel that matchup differently. Because tennis is not only about rankings. It is about matchups. Some opponents give you rhythm. Some opponents take it away. Some opponents make your strengths feel less certain. Eala appears to do that to Swiatek. And when a champion already questioning her level runs into a player who naturally creates discomfort, the result can look exactly like this. A tight first set that slips away. A second set that unravels faster than expected. A press conference that sounds less like frustration and more like reflection. So where does Swiatek go from here? That is the question her team has to answer now. Not because she cannot come back. She absolutely can. History is full of champions who went through seasons where confidence cracked and the whole world started asking whether the peak was gone. The best ones rebuild. But rebuild is the key word. Because this no longer looks like something one clean practice week can fix. It looks like Swiatek has to rebuild the relationship between her tennis and her mind. She has to stop measuring every match against the impossible version of herself. She has to find a way to compete without carrying every past trophy onto the court like a burden. She has to remember how to play points instead of protecting standards. That sounds easy. It is not. Especially when you are Iga Swiatek. Because when you are great, the world does not give you much room to struggle. People expect champions to solve things quickly. They expect a loss to become motivation. They expect the comeback to arrive on schedule. But tennis does not always work like that. Sometimes, confidence returns slowly. Sometimes, the rebuild begins with ugly matches. Sometimes a champion has to accept being uncomfortable before she can become dangerous again. And that might be where Swiatek is now, not at the end. At the beginning of a rebuild she probably never wanted to need. Meanwhile, Alex Eala is standing at the opposite emotional point of the story. Everything is opening. The ranking, the attention, the belief. The history. By reaching the second week of Wimbledon, she became the first player from the Philippines, man or woman, to reach that stage of a Grand Slam. That sentence matters, because tennis history is not equal across countries. Some nations grow up with champions, academies, funding, and pathways that already exist. Others have to build the dream from almost nothing. For the Philippines, Eala is not just another rising player. She is proof. Proof that someone from that country can stand on center court. Proof that the second week of a slam is not a foreign dream. Proof that a player who was outside the top 100 a year ago can beat the defending Wimbledon champion if the work, timing, and belief all meet at the right moment. But now comes the harder part. Because once you shock the world starts watching. Before Swiatek, Eala was dangerous. After Swiatek, she is known. That is a completely different kind of pressure. The next opponent will not underestimate her in the same way. The next scouting report will be sharper. The next match will come with more cameras, more interviews, more expectation, more noise. And that is why Jasmine Paolini becomes such an important test. Paolini is not Swiatek. She brings a different rhythm, a different kind of pressure, a different way of making opponents uncomfortable. She moves well. She competes hard. She knows what it feels like to go deep at Wimbledon. So for Eala, the question changes. Can she do it again when the opponent is different? Can she win when the emotional high of beating Swiatek is gone? Can she turn one historic moment into a real run? That is the question that separates a beautiful upset from a career-changing breakthrough. And for Swiatek, there is a different question waiting. Can she rebuild before the doubt gets heavier? Can she stop playing against her own resume? Can she find the freedom that made her great before greatness became something she had to defend every single week? That is why this Wimbledon match feels so important. Because it created two stories at once. For Alex Eala, it was the day she proved her rise was real. For Iga Swiatek, it was the day her struggles became impossible to hide. One player walked off center court with belief growing faster than ever. The other walked off with questions she can no longer avoid. And maybe that contrast is what made the match feel so powerful. Because sports rarely give us clean transitions. They do not announce when one player is rising and another is searching. They simply put them on the same court and let the truth reveal itself point by point. At the start of the match, Swiatek was the defending champion and Eala was the challenger. By the end, Eala looked like the player moving forward with freedom, and Swiatek looked like the champion trying to remember how that freedom used to feel. That does not mean Swiatek is finished. It means she is human. And maybe that is the hardest thing for dominant champions to show. For years, Swiatek made winning look controlled. Now she has to prove she can handle the part of a career that feels uncontrolled. The losses, the questions, the ranking drop, the press conferences where there is no perfect answer, the mornings after, when the trophy is gone and the rebuild has to begin quietly. That is the real test. Not whether she can hit another forehand winner. Of course she can. Not whether she can win another big title. She is too good to rule that out. The real test is whether she can detach from the pressure of being Iga Swiatek long enough to play like Iga Swiatek again. And for Eala, the test is just as real. Can she carry history without being crushed by it? Can she become more than the player who beat Swiatek? Can she keep turning belief into results now that everyone knows her name? That is what makes the next chapter so fascinating. Because this match did not close a story. It opened two. A champion searching for herself. And a young player discovering just how far she might be able to go. Maybe Swiatek comes back stronger from this. Champions often do. Maybe this loss becomes the painful reset she needed, the moment she stopped chasing the version of herself everyone expected and started rebuilding the one she actually is now. Or maybe this season gets heavier before it gets better. Maybe the questions follow her into the next tournaments. Maybe every tight match becomes another test of whether the old certainty is really coming back. And maybe Alex Eala is not just having one magical week. Maybe she is becoming the kind of player who changes how the tour sees her every time she steps on court. That is the beauty and cruelty of tennis. There is no hiding place. You stand alone. You serve. You return. You face the scoreboard. And eventually, whatever is happening inside you shows up in the ball. On center court, Alex Eala's ball showed belief. Iga Swiatek's showed doubt. That was the match. That was the story. And that is why this result will not be remembered as just another Wimbledon upset. It will be remembered as the day Alex Eala ended Swiatek's title defense and forced the tennis world to ask a question nobody expected to ask this soon. Is Iga Swiatek just having a difficult season? Or is she standing at the beginning of the hardest rebuild of her career? We do not know the answer yet. But we do know this. Alex Eala did not just beat the defending champion. She exposed the pressure sitting underneath her crown. And once that pressure is visible, every match after this becomes part of the story.